All right, we're rolling. I'm here with Steve Kusaba, who has a grand project. You want to tell me about it?
Yes. This project is a 47-hour Omni musical. And has some key themes in it. And one of the, it's about the advent of life and man, and the rights of man, and the reverence toward life. Because it examines the modern ruling structures and how they interact with people. And it mostly has sort of a message of hope, where in some place people might be able to live freely and not be so stifled by the ruling class.
And what's the name of this project?
It's the Centrifugal Zots Clock.
So, would you characterize it as a political work?
It's very political and very spiritual in a sense.
Now that's a lot of music. Are you the mastermind behind this project, so to speak?
Well, I wrote the music, but there are lots of contributors that actually made the whole thing come to life in a very big way. There's Jason Milkey did all of the drumming parts and did amazing writing for Omni drumming. It's a technique that's never been done before. In other words, there were some pieces that were liquid music where they weren't tied to a tight bar line. He actually went in and drummed to this, which is pretty amazing given the fact that most people are into time signatures and grids. And he did invaluable work. And Ed Goldfarb also did an incredible amount of work. And then all the performers that were hired with some amazing talent, on all instruments and singers. And so it was very much a group deal. But I think you'd like it.
Okay.
The spectacular sounds that come out of his music. I had to listen to it and I said, man, I know where he's coming from. But you know what? It's strange but powerful. Like, wow, I'm in. It's all good. There's plenty more I think I need to listen to over and over again.
Great clock, synchronizing bell, ringing the parts all move. True clock, mystifying tell, clue if it's dark or light. Send all the players hurrying to go, view all the layers and labyrinth below. Moving as if it's from a single thought, gears in the great song's floor. Great and mighty clock, synchronizing bell, ringing the parts all move. Great and mighty clock, mystifying tell, clue if it's dark or light. 2 billion national or not, no road to your impulses forgot. Follow instincts fully to frog, gears in the great song's
So for many years, I've tried to rationalize why people feel the need to be led. And historically, you want to look back and you want to think, well, people have had leaders controlling them and their environments for 7 to 12,000 years, but I don't think that this was an elected process. I'm not so sure that this was a process by which we all agreed that we need leaders. I think this was a forced imposition of will upon the people. And I think that after 7 to 12,000 years of that forced imposition, we find ourselves where we are today, hapless feeling without someone telling us what to do, or how to feel, or how to behave, or what constitutes conduct in a normal society. We've created entire systems, structures, if you will, created and designed not to serve the public, but to direct the public, to sway their opinion, to reinforce the ruling class's objectives, whatever they may be, whether it's war in Oceania, or whether it's or whether it's peace around the world, or whether it's corporocratic rule. We seem to find no lack of excuses for why we feel like we need these things. And ultimately, it's just a play on our very weakness of being completely lazy. So lazy that we'd rather not be bothered with managing the affairs of our societies, managing the affairs of ourselves in such a way as to which we assume responsibility. So we offset these responsibilities on the structures and governments and nation states and economic leaders and the ruling class as a whole to tell us how to feel, how to think, how to behave, and to chastise us when we don't conform to their system of control in society. The very nature of everything in the universe that you know has been given to you by these ruling class structures, and most of it's BS.
The problem with the Declaration of Independence was that once independence was gone from Britain, then the question became one of governance. How were these former colonies of Britain to govern? What led immediately to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 were a series of uprisings by debtors, essentially, not just in Massachusetts. The most famous is, of course, the Shays Rebellion in 1786.
The American state was born of a rebellion, but not the one American children are taught about in school. In 1786, 1 year before the Constitutional Convention, farmers in western Massachusetts organized a resistance movement against the state legislature in Boston. Most of the men were veterans of the Revolutionary War. Heavily indebted, overtaxed, and facing foreclosures of their homes and farms, they petitioned their government for redress. No help was forthcoming. Wealth inequality in the United States had been steadily increasing over the past century. In 1687 Boston, the top 1% owned 25% of the wealth. By 1770, that number had risen to 44%. During the same time period, the number of people who owned no property increased from 14% to 29%. The leader of the revolt was Daniel Shays, who had served as a captain in the Continental Army and fought at the Battle of Lexington. Under his leadership, rebels in Massachusetts forcefully closed local courts and liberated imprisoned debtors from jail. Governor James Bowdoin responded by organizing a state militia funded by wealthy merchants. The rebellion was crushed, but its legacy was profound.
The American state was founded largely to get the Ohio Valley, largely to cross the Appalachians. That is the Constitution, to organize an army and money in order to conquer further lands more to the west. That's the origin of the USA. But to do that, the slave masters are not going to do the fighting. What they will do is hire poor people to do it. When they don't pay the poor people, as they didn't pay Daniel Shays takes matters into his own hand in 1787 and goes to the courts and shuts down the courts because the courts were beginning to foreclose on the grounds that Daniel Shays and the other veterans from the American War of Independence did not have the money to pay back.
Debtor riots were happening throughout the 1780s, and they were sufficiently scary from the point of view of people with property that they had to do something about it. And what they did about it was essentially overthrow the Articles of Confederation and instill a much stronger, much more able government to protect the property interests that were in dire threat from the people, quote unquote. This was an elitist, you could almost say coup d'etat, except there wasn't any strong central government to launch a coup against. They were really trying to set one up and protect it against majoritarian interests, especially economic interests, especially property interests, especially threats from people who didn't have much. First thing they did when they got to Philadelphia in 1787 was they locked the doors. The only reason we know what happened behind those closed doors were that people like James Madison kept extensive notes. The United States Constitution was written by men, primarily propertied men, and primarily men who were very concerned by the threats to private property and to their own wealth and income and power that were occurring all over the colonies in the 18th century. You didn't have a strong central government. The states were actually sovereign entities, pretty much independent of one another. And some states would do this and other states would do that. You didn't have any power in the Articles of Confederation to deal with commerce. There was no executive branch. There was no central power. The states were really independent sovereignties, and they pretty much went their own way depending on the influence and the power of the particular interests and people in the power structure in the individual states. So the problem came to a head in 1786, 1787. Various people were rising up and protesting the fact that they were being exploited, that they were not living anything like a decent existence. They were being, they felt ripped off by courts and by banks and by the then existing power structure. These farmers, many of whom had been members of the Revolutionary Army, having fought off England, felt they deserved a somewhat better shake than they were getting. The state militia was called in and put it down bloodily. The problem, from the point of view of the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, was that this was not happening just in western Massachusetts. It was happening in places like Rhode Island and in Virginia as well. There was no central authority to organize the reaction to the kinds of things that were going on. This was a clear and present danger as perceived by George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and a lot of other very wealthy, very powerful, very elite men. There was a call for a meeting in 1786, which led to another call for a meeting in 1787, and various states sent delegates to that meeting in Philadelphia. So they closed the doors and they junked the Articles of Confederation completely. They were only authorized to revise the Articles of Confederation by the state delegations that they represented. One of the key people in the effort at ratification was Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton dreamt up the idea of publishing a series of papers, and he got James Madison and he got John Jay, who was the first Chief Justice of the United States under the new Constitution, to add their names to his effort, and they published a series of papers which became famous as the Federalist Papers. Although Hamilton did participate in the convention, he had relatively little influence there. He had a lot of influence later in passage of the Constitution in New York. But his views were so to the right of everybody else's and so elitist. You know, he sort of like represented Wall Street before there was a Wall Street. The key guy at the convention was really James Madison. He wrote for Hamilton's Federalist Papers, and one of the papers that Madison authored was Federalist Number 10. Madison's Federalist 10 was a very short essay, appeared in a newspaper, in which he basically outlined the philosophical context, the theoretical context within which the Constitution was adopted and within which the subsequent U.S. government would perform its governmental activities. In Federalist 10, Madison defined the problem that they faced in Philadelphia as how do we deal with the problem of factions? Especially the faction that he was worried about there was the majority faction. The essence of the majority faction would be a populistic power center. If too much power were placed in the hands of the people in a democratic society, that was a danger. If too much power was in the hands of the rich and powerful in a less democratic or non-democratic society, that was equally a problem to be dealt with. If you want to understand the U.S. Constitution, I think you have to put it in the context of the class struggle that was going on in these states at this time. If you read the discussions and the notes, especially at Madison's, it's quite clear what they felt and what they thought. Madison saw the new country as highly turbulent, full of conflicts, and he argued that the United States, perhaps they didn't have the extremes of wealth and poverty found in Europe, but in all civilized countries, he argued, and I'm quoting here, the people fall into different classes having a real or supposed difference of interest. There are creditors, he said, debtors, farmers, merchants, and manufacturers. There are, he continued, in particularly, the distinction of rich and poor. In the future, Madison said, there will be even greater inequality. An increase of population will of necessity increase the proportion of those who will labor under all the hardships of life and secretly sigh for a more equal distribution of its blessings. I mean, what clearer statement could you have of a class conflict model and understanding of the world in which he lived? He saw industrial capitalism coming here as well as it had been advanced even farther along in England and in European countries. And he basically, I think, didn't have an answer to how you stopped industrial capitalism from displacing not only slavery, which it did, but the whole idea of a democratic republic of relatively equal people in which there is not a hideously uneven distribution of wealth and income and power. And he thought that, in fact, if that happened, this Republican experiment of theirs would die.
The American Constitution was formulated primarily by James Madison. He's the major framer of the Constitution, and he wanted to overcome what he called the tyranny of the majority. He said a primary goal of government is to ensure that the opulent are protected from the majority. So therefore he designed the Constitution in such a way that, as he put it, the wealth of the nation will be in charge. The more responsible set of men, those who sympathize with property owners and their rights. And the system was designed that way. That power was in the Senate, which was the least representative body, and it was the wealth of the nation. In fact, it still is. The House of Representatives, which is more democratic, in theory, was given much less power. And the powerful executive is also supposed to represent the wealth of the nation. In Madison's defense, one should say that he was really pre-capitalist in his mentality. He assumed that the wealthy would be what he called benevolent gentlemen who would not be concerned with their own interests, but with the benefit of the people. Adam Smith, who preceded him, was much more realistic. He pointed out that the principal architects of policy, namely the merchants and manufacturers in his day, they ensure that policies are designed so that their own interests are protected. No matter how grievous the effect on others, including the people of England. It's rather interesting to compare Madison's thinking, which founded this country, with the first major book on politics, namely Aristotle's Politics. Aristotle surveyed many kinds of systems and decided that of all of them, didn't like any of them, but he said of all of them, democracy is probably the best. But he said that democracy has a problem, and it was the same problem that Madison noticed centuries later. He said if in Athens everyone had a right to vote, the poor majority would attack the property of the rich, insist that it be divided, and he also felt that was unfair. But Madison and Aristotle had opposite solutions. Madison's solution was to restrict democracy. Aristotle's solution was to restrict inequality.
The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, they were the price the Federalists had to pay in the ratifying conventions to pass the document. So the democratic element of the Constitution, which of course is the Bill of Rights, was forced down their throats. It didn't come out of Philadelphia at all. It was appended in 1791 and forced down on the Constitution by the more democratic elements in the society. Even with the Bill of Rights, we have a system which, is hardly perfect from the point of view of civil rights and civil liberties, let's put it mildly. It trampled all over with the rights of citizens. So the Bill of Rights is hardly an ironclad set of guarantees for civil rights and civil liberties in the United States. I'd hate to think of the United States without it. The Anti-Federalists were significantly more partial to democratic elements in the society and to the rights of ordinary people than were the significantly more elitist Federalists.
That's how we invested in community colleges and land-grant colleges like Michigan State. We invest. Can I get some water? Come on up here. Give me some water. I want a glass of water. I want a glass of water. Well, I'm still waiting for my water. Somebody obviously didn't hear me. Hold on a second. Now, the reason I know I'm okay is because I already had some Flint water. Here we go. Thank you. I really did need a glass of water. This is not a stunt.
A Czech artist known for his anti-communist stance has floated a huge statue of a hand making an obscene gesture on Prague's main river. The 10-meter purple middle finger by sculptor David Cartwright was placed on a pontoon on the river near the famed Charles Bridge. The statue appeared 4 days before parliamentary elections that could give the communists a taste of power almost a quarter century after they were ousted.
Že to odpovídá současné situaci, která je politická. Vystihuje to věcně, to vystihuje, jako vždycky pan Černý je perfektní umělec, který vystihne vždycky momentální situaci doby.
The artist himself did not want to comment on the middle finger. He said the gesture itself was well known and clear.
So we, the true elite, the obsolete. What do they know? What do they care that I'm number 101? I'm number 101. I'm number 101. Oh, possibly I'm number 2. Track of malcontents here on the scene. We will fully fill the database. They won't slip by, and as we all know, society, it needs a good to make things work. The enemy is all the charm who oppose me for it. All the plenty that we can provide for so many in exchange for our share. Could it send by mail? We will move an eye forward. No one else can do this difficult job. All other ways would be on error. The clown. I'm number 1. We'll tie you to the T and say it's me. What do they know? What do they care that I'm number 101? I'm number 101. I'm number 101. Oh, possibly I'm number 1.
But I am not voting for Biden. I haven't voted for Democrats since 2000. A lot of it's personal. I spent months of my life in Gaza. I am not voting for anybody who arms and funds the apartheid state of Israel. I have taught in the prisons for 10 years. I have very close relationships with my students and their families whose lives were devastated because of Joe Biden and Bill Clinton and the Democratic Party. And my loyalty is to them. I suppose it's not practical, but I don't really care. I just can't betray these people. I spent 20 years overseas. This is personal. And, I have to go back to these places. I at least want to, earn the right to ask for their forgiveness. But let me just throw in there that the whole mess that we're in was a bipartisan effort. And Biden was complicit. What created Trump? I know half my family comes out of the working class in Maine. So I have very personal experience as to the rage of the white dispossessed voter. The small towns in Maine where my family comes from, courtesy of NAFTA, are destroyed. I mean, destroyed is not too light a word. This is what vomited up this figure like Trump, in the same way that the economic collapse of Yugoslavia vomited up figures like Slobodan Milosevic and Franjo Tuđman and Radovan Karadzic and others. And if we don't attack these systemic issues, which Biden has zero intention of doing, he's already made that very clear, things are going to continue to devolve and get worse and worse and worse. And this is part of the infantilism of American politics, which infects the left as much as the right. You know, you look back, you read the memoirs of the old anarchists who were working 12 hours a day in the sweatshops in the Lower East Side, and at night they were, you know, all sitting around study groups. And because they had that kind of systemic understanding, they were considered a threat by the state and within the prison system. They immediately went into isolated, they didn't commit any prison infractions. They were immediately isolated from the rest of the population. So, you know, I come out of that old left, which has largely disappeared in the United States and been replaced by, I would call it a kind of boutique left or boutique activism. I think I think we have to destroy the system. We have to break it down through nonviolence, through mass civil disobedience, and getting too caught up in the parlor games of Biden or Trump. This is the point. I don't want to see Trump win. I'm going to be honest. I find the guy I never thought I'd look back with nostalgia towards George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm.
At least he was also an idiot, but at least he was managed. But at the same time, I'm not playing their game. I haven't played their game, and I'm not going to play it.
What is the alternative? The Democrats gave up on the working class 40 years ago. That's just the working class is not their constituency. No one is their. No one in the political system is. The Republicans claim to be, but they're basically their class enemy.
We with mission to destroy examines the headless mob. The mob that knows something's wrong, but it just doesn't understand what. In fact, the mob may actually complain about a set of conditions that are caused by a particular group, and the mob might protest and make rallies everywhere, and their solution is to ask the group to solve the problem, the group that actually made the problem. But they don't really understand that because they don't analyze things particularly well. I remember during the Occupy movement that since, you know, people were always saying, well, we don't want you to expropriate our movement, and they were saying all this corny stuff. It was like a headless mob, a mass of disconnected people just sort of angry about everything. And they managed to grab the closest thing to a leader that they could find when they filled the streets up at Wall Street, you know, and when they were just jam-packed, and they pulled him onto TV, and he was on CNBC, and they're talking to him and asking him questions, and he's clueless, he's rudderless, he's stammering, he doesn't really have any clarity of thought for the whole thing. He just is like, he's a perfect leader for them. He's angry, but he thinks he knows how everything's working, but he doesn't really understand anything. And it's just sort of aimless anger and convenient anger. Convenient anger to come out in the summer and just complain. But anger that is not like the anger that was behind the people who were rallying against Ceausescu. That was an anger that was going to go get him. It wasn't like, you know, the Robespierre days, you know, where they were going to have the head of the king and the queen and Antoinette. It was just sort of it was a general anger, but an anger of convenience where they're just going to be out there and kind of mad and demand a lot of things. And then when the winter kind of came in sort of a very, very well coordinated takedown, all the various police departments across the country went and moved on all of these people. and just swept them away like a butterfly, just gone. The only one that really put any real resistance was the Oakland chapter, I think. But I could be wrong. There might be more to it. But there was, it went away. It didn't come out and protest in the winter. They didn't have a plan because it was formless and it could do nothing and it did nothing. And that's represented in We with Mission to Destroy, with the exception of, in this particular piece, it's not a parallel to that. These people mean business, but they're every bit as headless and not grounded in a clear understanding of how things work.
We're not a carefully structured organization. You'd have to ask each person. Everybody is allowed to do their thing. If some people storm the amphitheater, they storm the amphitheater. If other people want to smoke dope, other people want to go and tell the cops what we're doing, that's good. The cops want to come down and beat our heads, that's it. I mean, it's all conceived as a total theater.
Youth propel to force the issue, these soldiers of scattered thought. Precisely numb, nothing to say, so peacefully virtues of dust. Youth compelled to fight the windmills with all the tools they were taught. General Assembly, divine win these men, so honorable the soul they lack is some doubt. To destroy, both hat in hand. We of semi-intellect, oh, is a tattoo, which is our true name. Nothing left to do but take our place to drive the flame of history. Let's just be free. The lunch is free. Let's just be free. Aim me at the target. Quick, shoot before I get real sick. Hurry, let's be free. Cosmos did neglect, all hat in hand. Born with minds fresh to infect, driven yet how can we find joy when it is our life, it is our true sweet deed. It is stand erect with cup of mead, long as we make history. what's the issue, these soldiers of scattered thought? Precisely not, nothing to say, so peacefully, virtues of dust. Fatal youth compelled to fight the windmills with all the tools they were taught. General Assembly, leave behind with these men, so honorable the soul they lack is some doubt. To destroy all hand in hand. We of semi-intellect, war is the tattoo, it is our true name. Nothing left to do but take our place to drive the flame of history.
No, revolt against it. Revolt doesn't answer a thing.
Hello, I'm John Barron. Back in July, we launched our Election Promise Tracker, an interactive website which lets you follow dozens of pre-election commitments and see whether they've been delivered, are still in progress, stalled or broken.
I'm the one who will not raise taxes. Congress will push me to raise taxes and I'll say no, and they'll push and I'll say no, and they'll push again and I'll say to them, read my lips. No new taxes.
What's the category?
Well, the category is my top 10 campaign promises when I become president.
Well,
I mean, this is news making. I've not done this anywhere else. So, okay, here we go. Number 9. Each year on my birthday, every American gets a cupcake.
I'd ask the wealthy to pay a little more.
I don't want to cause a problem. I don't want to cause. But in the end, Mexico's going to pay for the wall. I'm just telling you.
Well, everyone wants change. America must change. But change must be guided by principle.
Here's what change is saying to people who already have health insurance and the employers who are providing it, will work to lower your premiums.
There's a change that's come over America.
This place has a way of making us think about the kind of future our young people will have.
That the rich aren't paying their fair share. We should raise taxes on the rich. I did that as mayor in New York City.
We need fundamental change, not more of the same. That's why I've offered a comprehensive plan, a real plan to rebuild America. Together we can make America work again.
They're a new generation of Democrats, Bill Clinton and Al Gore, and they don't think the way the old Democratic Party did. They've called for an end to welfare as we know it, so welfare can be a second chance, not a way of life. They've sent a strong signal to criminals by supporting the death penalty. Clinton Gore, for people, for a change.
We always knew our climb would be steep, but in record numbers you came out and you spoke up for change. That's what's happening in America right now. Change is what's happening in America.
If we're going to stop inflation, we must do it now. Not with bigger government. It takes better government. That's what we owe ourselves and our children. That's why I'm running for president.
Only one man has the proven experience we need. Ronald Reagan for president.
Together, we will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And yes, together, We will make America great again.
Now in complete control of the government of this state, I made no campaign promises.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you do. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure they too join with Americans in recognizing what an immense feat this is. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the sea of tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one.
1961 was the year of my birth, the year that Kennedy made his announcement. And one of my earliest memories is sitting on my grandfather's shoulders, waving a flag as astronauts arrived in Hawaii.
We would actually lease rockets from Russia and other countries, but from Russia to send people up. And we appreciate the whole relationship with Russia, but we'll be doing it ourselves. We're in a position that we haven't been in for many, many years.
They know it's true that everyone gets one number, good or bad. The tally tells a total. Mystery shakes out a play. We are the actors and none can control. So fortune shades colors. Working through the difficulty of life, the unforeseen troubles. Many authors chose to write, raise a potential, feel the magic on its way. Yet all of us hold the hope of having meaning. And out of this, they will step right in, recognize the longing, fully grasp the need. There he goes with a silent grip. Then comes the pitch, selling pieces of moon. Pieces of moon. Pieces of moon will not fade. Pieces of Mars will turn out the same. Pieces of moon in the daylight, sharing their bloom with the young and happily colorful. They know it's true that everyone gets one number, good or bad. The tally tells a total. Mystery shakes out a sleigh. We are the actors and none can control. So fortune blends the colors. Working through the difficulty of life, the unforeseen troubles. Many authors chose to write, raise a potential, feel the magic on its way. Yet all of us hold the hope of having meaning. And out of this, they will step right in, recognize the longing, fully grasp the need. In his eyes, the icy stare, I sensed a smirk. Maybe I should go berserk. What is he up to then? Comes the pitch,
And I still, to this day, Counsel, don't see anything wrong with taking the Ayatollah's money and sending it to support the Nicaraguan freedom fighters.
They have basically said to the entire United States, we don't care what the people say, we don't care what the Congress says, we don't care what the other oversight organizations say, we're going to find some way to rid the planet of communism, and we don't care who gets killed in the process.
As long as there is breath in this body, I will speak and work, strive and struggle for the cause of the Nicaraguan freedom fighters.
Freedom fighters, they are not. They are terrorists.
Wait a minute. This isn't the way the Constitution was set up. This isn't what the Founding Fathers intended.
You start out breaking foreign laws, since most countries have laws against secretly overthrowing their governments, and then you end up breaking the law at home.
Sometimes you have to go above the written law.
They were willing to literally put the Constitution at risk because they believed somehow there was a higher order of things.
We have liberty, and the only way we're going to keep liberty is to have people who are strong, like Reagan and North.
Violence is not the answer. You don't teach the democratic way by shoving an M16 down somebody's throat. And if we continue these policies to rob ourselves in order to feed this national security monster, we are going to continue to degrade American life.
We're only talking about subverting the Constitution, that's all.
"150 years ago, the business corporation was a relatively insignificant institution. Today, it is all-pervasive. Like the church, the monarchy, and the Communist Party in other times and places, the corporation is today's dominant institution."
This is how Americans like to think of their government. Its values are enshrined in beautiful monuments and noble inscriptions, the temples of our national faith. But for 40 years, a secret government has been growing behind these stately tributes to American ideals, growing like a cancer on the Constitution.
Not everybody tells the truth. Not everybody thinks the public is entitled to know the truth. And not everybody thinks they should go by the law.
But I don't think we'll ever know the truth about what really happened. I mean, I feel like there's still lies out there, and we still don't know.
The thing that I started thinking was, this must happen all the time. This time they just got caught.
People lined up early every day, waiting to listen in person to the Iran-Contra hearings, while millions watched from home on television. Members of the secret government had been forced from the shadows into the spotlight.
I will tell you right now, Counsel, and all the members here gathered, that I misled the Congress.
At that meeting?
At that meeting.
Face to face?
Face to face.
You made false statements to them about your activities in support of the Contras?
I did.
Oliver North had been the secret government's chronic liar, long on zeal for his president and the cause. But he was not the only zealot, not the only one to deceive. The hearings revealed a wholesale policy of secrecy shrouded in lies, of passion cloaked in fiction and deception.
I see the corporation as part of a jigsaw in society as a whole, which if you remove it, the picture's incomplete. But equally, if it's the only part, it's not going to work.
A corporation is like a family unit. People in a corporation work together for a common end.
Like the telephone system, it reaches almost everywhere. It's extraordinarily powerful. It's pretty hard to avoid.
The eagle, soaring, clear-eyed, competitive, prepared to strike, but not a vulture. Noble, visionary, majestic, that people can believe in and be inspired by, that creates such a lift that it soars. I could see that being a good logo for the principal company.
Okay, guys, enough bullshit.
So I guess in a way they are counter-revolutionary, and God bless them for being that way. And I guess that makes them Contras, and so it makes me a Contra too.
The Contras. Ronald Reagan compared them to our founding fathers. In reality, Ronald Reagan and CIA Director William Casey were their founding fathers. Their ultimate goal was the violent overthrow of the Nicaraguan government, a government the United States legally recognizes. So the war had to be carried out covertly as a campaign of terror. But Americans were outraged when CIA agents mined the Nicaraguan harbors and blew up fuel tanks, causing thousands of Nicaraguan citizens to flee their homes. Congress, in protest, cut off the Contra funds. When the president refused to give up on his creation, the Contras cheered.
Corporations are artificial creations. You might say they're monsters trying to devour as much profit as possible at anyone's expense.
The word corporate gets attached in almost, in a pejorative sense to, and gets married with the word agenda. And one hears a lot about the corporate agenda, as though it is evil, as though it is an agenda which is trying to take over the world.
But how to keep the Contra War going despite Congress, the law, and public opinion? First, a small cabal in the White House took charge of policy. The President, CIA Director Casey, National Security Advisors McFarlane and Poindexter, and their aide, Colonel North. To raise money for the Contras, the secret team turned to right-wing governments that could do favors for the United States and receive favors in return. The King of Saudi Arabia doled out $1 million a month. The Sultan of Brunei coughed up $10 million that was misplaced through a White House error. The secret government also encouraged the fundraising efforts of General John Singlaub. Relieved of his command for insubordination in 1977, he now runs the World Anti-Communist League. Here at home, wealthy right-wingers were solicited directly by Oliver North. Conservative activist Carl Channell, who later pleaded guilty to conspiracy to defraud the government, worked directly with Colonel North, pumping donors like investor Joseph Aboyle.
I take it your encounters invariably involved both Mr. Channell and Colonel North. And maybe Channell took you to North, and then you met with North, and then subsequently you would meet with Channell. But in a sense, they worked as a team.
In a sense, yes.
Mrs. Garwood, is that true in your instance as well?
I would say that's a fairly accurate description.
All this was being done to advance the president's policies, but it wasn't enough. To get around the law, the White House then enlisted the services of something called the Enterprise.
The Enterprise is the group of companies that Mr. Hakim formed to manage the Contra and the Iranian project.
Who controls the Enterprise?
I exercised overall control.
General Richard Secord has been in and out of covert operations for a quarter century. One of the first Americans to fly secret missions in Vietnam, he also helped run the CIA's secret war in Laos. Secord became a major Pentagon figure in foreign military sales, especially to the Shah of Iran. That's where he met this man, Albert Hakim.
Not only was I presented with an opportunity to help my country, the United States, and my native land, Iran, but at the same time, I had the opportunity to profit financially.
Albert Hakim was Secord's partner in the Enterprise. Born in Iran, he made millions selling American-made arms to the Shah, often relying on bribes and illegal payoffs to ease the way. Now he handled financial matters for the Enterprise. Like any good business, the Enterprise was designed to make money.
Am I correct, Mr. Secord, that from December 1984 until July 1985, you were engaged in selling arms to the Contras for profit?
That's correct.
Then, at the direct request of the secret White House team, the Enterprise brokered American arms to the Ayatollah Khomeini. Beyond Secord and Hakim, it grew to include a shadowy network of arms dealers, fraudulent companies, and secret bank accounts. The Enterprise was, as Senator Daniel Inouye put it,
a shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
What is a corporation? It is one form of business ownership.
It's a group of individuals working together to serve a variety of objectives, the principal one of which is earning large, growing, sustained, legal returns for the people who own the business.
Two kinds of law on the earth that rule the whole world, but most people don't know that. All governments are ruled by what is called civil law, which is called, in all countries, the law of the land. So you'll say, well, you can't do that because that's against the law of the land. The law of the land is civil law, Roman civil law, the law of the land. But there is a second law which also operates all over the earth identical. It's called UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. That is the law of God in the world of business. If you have a company, if you have a corporation, if you are doing business where you buy and sell and make money, you are operating on this earth under something called UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. Because if all countries worked on a different commercial code, then nobody could do business with anybody. The most severe law in this world is called UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. It's the Bible of business on the earth. Uniform Commercial Code is based directly on Vatican canon law. Consequently, when a ship pulls into port, it pulls in and stops, and it's called in its berth. So when the ship pulls into its berth, the first thing the captain must do is to present a certificate of manifest to the port authorities, which means that the port authorities need to know how much is on this ship that you're bringing into our country and our economy. So you have to have a certificate of manifest of what is the value of your ship here. What are you doing? Consequently, when you are born, you come out of your mother's water. Therefore, you must have a birth certificate, a certificate of manifest, because you are a corporation-owned item. You are a human resource. You have to have a certificate of manifest to see how much this individual is going to make for us. Did you know, for instance, that your birth certificate is a security on the stock exchange in the New York stock market? Did you know that? Because if you order your birth certificate, get a new one, order your birth certificate, it'll only cost you, sometimes it's free, it'll only cost you a few dollars, order your birth certificate. On your birth certificate, all birth certificates in this country, on the bottom, it will tell you this is printed on security papers. Do not accept if not on full color security paper. Then on the right hand corner, you will always have a series of numbers, red numbers, printed on the birth certificate. Those numbers are a security stock exchange number on the World Stock Exchange. You go to any good stock office and ask them, check these numbers in your computer and see how much this stock is worth, the certificate. And they will check it on the New York Stock Exchange and find your birth certificate is a stock on the stock exchange in America. Why? Because you are worth money to the international bank that bought you in 1930.
You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, rims, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime. And our children will live, Mr. Beale, to see that perfect world in which there's no war or famine, oppression or brutality. One vast and ecumenical holding company for whom all men will work to serve a common profit, in which all men will hold a share of stock, all necessities provided, all anxieties tranquilized, all boredom amused.
Paul Weyrich, the guy who co-founded the Heritage Foundation and who was then working to mobilize Christian voters for Ronald Reagan, had this to say in Dallas, in a public church in Dallas.
How many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome? Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Here in Columbus, Ohio's capital, voters waited as long as 2.5 hours today to cast their ballots.
People waiting in line for 9 hours to vote, some getting discouraged and actually going home without exercising their franchise.
People waiting for as long as 15 hours to vote in line because they only had 2 places to vote.
During the hours of 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m., everyone was turned away due to broken machines.
What I saw was voter intimidation in the form of city employees that were sent in to stop illegal parking.
I attempted to vote in the same place that I voted in the primaries and was told that my name was not on the rolls.
On Franklin County, there are no votes for David Cobb. Well, that's a problem. I voted for David Cobb.
The polls had opened an hour late. They did not open until about 7:30 a.m. The polling machines were locked in the principal's office. Hundreds of people were turned away, were forced to leave the line because they needed to be at school, they needed to be at work, or they needed to take their children to school.
We had 2 voting machines for 1,300 people in our county. One of which was broken for 2 hours, the first 2 hours of the day, from 6:30 to 8:30.
Ohio has been litigation central today. Numerous lawsuits filed there.
49% for President Bush, 48% for Senator Kerry. That is a statistical tie.
You should know that after a long night of swing votes, the presidential race is frankly still too close to call.
And he had already set the record by running to Florida to stand next to Katherine Harris to give her some backbone to do what she did in Florida.
Big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column.
Turn the lights down. The party just got wilder.
Florida goes to Mr. Bush.
Bush wins. Headline of the hour. Folks, it might be premature.
So we take Florida away from George W. Bush.
This is no longer an election. This is like Alice in Wonderland.
5A11 is a vote for Gore.
Ohio, 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 Florida, Florida, Florida.
There is a small but blood-curdling group of reports of voting irregularities and possible fraud, principally in Ohio and Florida.
The vote is now so close between them that there will be an automatic recount.
What are you talking about, recounts? I'm in bed. There's no recounts going on. And literally within 3 hours, we were in the throes of a recount.
The question of who will be the next president is right on her desk. She's the Secretary of State, Katherine Harris.
As Secretary of State, I am Chief Elections Officer.
Harris was the state co-chair of George Bush's presidential campaign. Today, Governor Jeb Bush said she is doing a good job.
I think she's doing the right thing.
Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States.
About 29% of registered voters, that's about 50 million people, are expected to use these electronic touchscreen machines next week. That's about double the number in the last election, and there is some concern.
In North Carolina, over 4,000 ballots are gone forever, lost when a voting machine passed its arbitrary limit. In South Florida, election officials were horrified to see vote totals start counting down after they hit 32,000.
All 3 voting systems have significant security and reliability vulnerabilities, which pose a real danger to the integrity of national and state elections.
You can change the software, you can infect the system with a virus.
Gaming systems, like your Microsoft Xbox 360 or Sony PlayStation 3, are engineered to resist a wide variety of tampering attacks. That level of engineering is entirely absent from voting machines.
As some voters were turned away when the machines weren't functioning properly.
The absolute control over the election process that a company like Diebold potentially could have, from tabulation to the software that's inside, it's concerning to people.
It shouldn't be. I'll be blunt. Diebold does not control the elections.
Florida, November 2000.
The White House contest between the Republican Party candidate George W. Bush and the Democratic Party's Al Gore was ultimately determined by a post-election recount of Florida's paper ballot cards. In the next presidential election in 2004, many U.S. states decided to abandon paper systems and instead use touchscreen computer voting machines. But in embracing this new technology, new vulnerabilities have arisen. These concerns about verifying what an electronic voting machine recorded have prompted some observers, including Benjamin Ginsberg at Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C., to call for part of the traditional balloting system to come back.
Look, wherever you have a computer, it's possible to tamper with it.
From a security standpoint, what distinguishes computerized voting systems from traditional systems is not that computers are easier to compromise, but that the consequences of compromise can be so much more severe. Tampering with an old-fashioned ballot box can affect a few hundred votes at most, but injecting a virus into a single computerized voting machine can potentially affect an entire election. 2 weeks ago, my colleagues Ari Feldman and Alex Halderman and I released a detailed security analysis of this machine, the Diebold AccuVote TS, which is used in Maryland, Georgia, and elsewhere. My written testimony summarizes the findings of our study. One main finding is that the machines are susceptible to computer viruses that spread from machine to machine and silently transfer votes from one candidate to another.
In what might be a political candidate's worst nightmare, one man in Mississippi recorded a video of an electronic voting machine malfunctioning.
It is not letting me vote for who I want to vote for.
And it is time for all of us to step out of the mainstream and fight for what is left of our anemic democracy.
The Democrats gave up on the working class 40 years ago. That's just the working class is not their constituency. No one is their. No one in the political system is. The Republicans claim to be, but they're basically their class enemy. However, they can appeal to people.
And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
A new world order. A world where the rule of law governs the conduct of nations.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
1:51 p.m. Tuesday. As Air Force One touches down at Andrews Air Force Base, the president first learns of network exit polls showing Kerry ahead throughout the battleground. Dejected, Mr. Bush tells his confidant, Karen Hughes, the numbers are what they are. I'm surprised.
It caused celebration among Kerry forces, panic and then disbelief on the president's team. It even caused the markets on Wall Street to drop sharply. These polls are paid for by a consortium of major news organizations, NBC News included.
Saw a poll today showing that 80% of the country believes the president won the election in a fair vote. The other 20% write me.
We've been a little surprised by how many emails we've had suggesting that maybe once again the country got it wrong. Now, we're not particularly disposed to conspiracy theories. As you know, Mr. Bush won by a very comfortable margin of more than 3 million votes.
There were no problems that would lead me to believe that there were stolen elections or widespread fraud.
Not according to some people who have devised various theories.
Websites hostile to the president claim massive vote fraud, that Senator Kerry really won. And what about those early exit polls giving Kerry the lead? They say that means the election was stolen. Convinced?
Clearly for many people, however, results are not enough.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes.
How do you know that to be the case?
Because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I worked for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials could detect?
They'd never see it.
And your testimony is under oath?
Yes, sir.
And the testimony you've given is true?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Now that you've got your vote and you want to flip it, you hit the R, hit the S, and it flips. Bush wins.
That's simple.
That's simple. 24 lines of code, you never see it.
There is absolutely no assurance whatsoever on anything with regard to these machines.
Absolutely none, unless you look at the source code and make sure it's safe before it goes in.
Thank you very much.
Clinton Curtis died in an airplane crash some years back, and he worked for a congressman down in Florida by the name of Tom Feeney, who rose to the level of Speaker of the House of Florida, this Florida state legislature. And there's some doubt about his dying in this small plane crash. You know, there's some speculation that it was sabotage. Nobody really knows.
A new study finds hackers can easily tamper with electronic voting machines by installing a virus to disable machines and change vote totals.
At Princeton University, Professor Edward Felton shows us how to hack a Diebold voting machine.
The voting machine virus is on this memory card.
The machines all use the same key to unlock them, a very low-tech number commonly used for luggage or desk furniture.
Anyone who can get the door open and stick in a memory card can insert a virus or do whatever they like.
The Princeton group only studied one type of machine. That model will be used in 357 counties across the country by 10% of the voters in November.
California officials have learned in recent days that the state's most widely used electronic voting machines can be manipulated to let voters cast ballots over and over and over again.
If you can hack into computers at some of the most secret federal agencies in the country, why can't people hack into these voting machines? It's crazy.
And this is going to impact elections. And I'm not talking about Republicans or Democrats. It's going to screw candidates on both sides of the aisle. In Maryland, the recent primaries were such a debacle and disaster that the governor is now arguing that the state should altogether scrap the entire electronic voting system and return immediately to paper ballots.
I have doubt whether they can be fixed in 7 weeks. And so my issue here is you have an election coming, you're going to have a lot of people, a couple million people voting. Why take a risk?
In one congressional race, there are charges that thousands of votes were cast but not counted. And the results were close enough that those votes could well have made the difference. And where is this congressional district? In Florida.
Republican Vern Buchanan issued a statement claiming victory by a razor-thin margin, 368 votes.
We won! Not so fast, says Democrat Christine Jennings, who couldn't help noticing that in the Democratic-leaning Sarasota County part of the district, 18,000 people, or 13% of voters who cast ballots in other races, had no recorded vote in this race.
One of the things I want to find out is what happened to 18,000 votes that were not counted for this election.
Sarasota County uses a controversial electronic voting machine that gives no paper record.
Go, Chris, go! People want to know that their vote counts. And this is about the confidence that the voters of this country have in their voting system.
Amidst the raucous back and forth of the final presidential debate, this charge from Republican John McCain.
We need to know the full extent of Senator Obama's relationship with Acorn, who is now on the verge of maybe perpetrating one of the greatest frauds in voter history in this country, maybe destroying the fabric of democracy.
In Nevada, the voter fraud team raided Acorn's office. It's one of at least 8 states that have begun voter fraud investigations.
Well, I tell you what, it helps in Ohio that we got Democrats in charge of the machines.
Well, we have to investigate these, not only allegations, there's evidence that there's been voter fraud going on in the battleground states primarily. Even, I'm told, in the state of Nevada, they've had shut down their offices.
There is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections.
I want to be honest. It's not as if it's just Republicans who have monkeyed around with elections in the past. Sometimes Democrats have too.
So what is your motive?
My motive is to protect the election process from mishap and mischief.
What is the evidence, though, of mishap and mischief? Where's the fraud?
Well, it can happen at any place along the way.
But where has it happened?
Well, we do know it happens.
Do you?
Of course we do.
Well, after careful study, I found that there is no, in the U.S. system, there is no intermediate step between a final Supreme Court decision and violent revolution. And
you were against violent revolution?
Well,
confused, I go where the numbers tell me to. I go where the numbers tell me to. Where the numbers tell me to go. Us malcontents, yes, we must fight back. Us malcontents. 2, 6, 5, 7, 4 is real. Only this can fight despair. Only this. It's time to fight back. Us malcontents, so we must fight back. Us malcontents. Away when I must fight you. Those who know nothing interfere with my plans. It's time to fight back. Us malcontents, we will prevail. I seek, I search, it's hard to even know where the action is. 674-29837-6029 is real, yet they fill my head with thoughts of insurrection. So they tell the story of some twisted Karen. They go left, they go right, they don't know where or when they want to go. Oh, how they're so confused. I go where the numbers tell me to. I go where the numbers do. I go where the numbers tell me to. Where the numbers tell me to go.
Why is it people can't resist the clownish rule of the duopoly? Why is the history of the earth one in which no matter what realization someone comes to, there are forces, the forces arrayed against them are too great. They just get run over. Doesn't matter, you can understand all you want, but you're just one person. So as you watch these crazy things unfold, as everyone does in their lifetime, these moves to things that just never should even be considered, everybody has an apathy. It's like, what can I do? What can I do about it? Yeah, I know, it's like that. But what can you do? It's just too big. They bow their heads sheepishly. Everything's contained and controlled, and it's the isolation of the individual. The problem of the isolation of the individual is you're just an individual, you're not a collective. You're not people with a shared consciousness and a shared knowledge of what's happening, of knowing what the ruling class does. People are run over by these superstructures. And it's not like these superstructures are built on vast numbers. Okay, it feels that way. Their power is vast.
One of the things about structures, especially structures that have some rule or power or authority, even if it's just the illusion of those things, they don't need power and authority to have the illusion of power and authority. One of the things about those is those kinds of structures are that they create bureaucracies of structures that oppose those structures. And the next thing you know, you've got a whole network of legal entities as if they're a real thing, even though they're completely fictitious. And the reason I say they're completely fictitious is the understanding of the definition of a state is that it's a state of mind. So when you're in space and you're on the moon and you look at the planet, you don't see red lines that identify borders. Those countries exist because the people within the parameters, the perceived parameters of that country, believe that they're Turkish or they're Iranian. And at the same time, that system of legally recognizing these structures and denying others recognition leads to things like the Kurdish state. And all of those things have attached to them an agenda, right? So this agenda is always hidden, or it shows itself as the circumstances unveil, right? I mean, it doesn't mean there's someone sitting in a room somewhere plotting and conniving, but they're certainly going to take advantage of every scenario that may affect the outcome of any given position. So take, for example, film censorship. So through the early parts of the 20th century, film censorship became a thing because film was a new medium, right? And people were exploring with that. But so you had the prohibitionist movement. You had these progressivists who were moving towards this idea of the self-identity be damned. The rights of the individual be damned. This ant-like mindset that somehow the collective is more important, and protecting the collective and pushing its agenda is more important than the rights of the individual. And so we find ourselves in a very interesting point in time that leads us to censorship. These people are moral crusaders. So they create a movement to get states and communities to ban and censor films. And what happens? The film community gets together and they create the motion picture associations, the big MPAAs and the motion picture and film industry, who then band together to move against them. Well, who's in the middle of all of this? Who yields the ultimate power in this struggle? And that's the entity that's juxtapositioned itself into the middle of all of it, government. And more often than not, meeting the base of constituents to get reelected the next year, to be able to be in that position of power, to make these kind of determinations, to regulate industry, to determine the outcome of the rights of men, and to have that authority over others was, you hand the lion a piece of meat, he's going to eat it. And so that's one example of how structures breed structures that breed structures, until in the end the ultimate problem in the middle of all of these structures, the thing that causes the most damage and the most harm to people and freedom and individuality, often gets overlooked, and we end up blaming someone else. Like, we blame big oil. Well, who's enabling them? We blame the banks. Who's enabling them? Who's that guy in the middle? Yet again, taking special interests and playing the identity politics angle on the public to win the consent of the people, to deprive them of their own freedoms in the interest of the survival of the colony. A very interesting dynamic that plays out that most people aren't aware of, don't pay attention to, and it's because they're busy looking out for their own self-interest in the best way they can. because they've created systems and structures to oppress. You know, if that's the change, if the perception of that is the change, if its meaning is the change, then that lies in the individual, that guy that the entire system stacked against, right? So then what? Then we enter William B. You know, William Burroughs, he didn't fall into any molds. He didn't conform. As a matter of fact, William Burroughs kind of felt like we all live in a world that wasn't made for him, that he wasn't made to be in. He didn't necessarily identify with how you feel, nor did he care to. You know, he didn't believe in these rules of control that we all subject ourselves to. So the government says you can't put things in your body. You know, in the Burroughs, you know, what is the greatest vestige of human private property but his own self, his own body? And who knows better what that body wants or needs or enjoys more than himself? So who was this giant structure to tell him he couldn't do it? He didn't feel like he needed to. He didn't hurt anybody. What the hell are you talking to me for? You know, he didn't feel like he needed to do that. And as such, as melancholy as he was, he probably led the most full life he could, just by simply not allowing restrictive society to shape and form the type of person it wanted to see in its society. Because he saw society as a much greater thing, much bigger picture, a thing, a place where we can all commune as one entity through the beauty of being individuals. And so for Burroughs, the world and its mechanisms were so perverse to a point of absurdity that it was laughable that most couldn't see that.
Prior, the centrifugal Zotz clock, the whole idea has been going on for some time in its original versions. So the main idea here is good William B, William Burroughs, does battle with evil William B, William Bennett. And the battle between the surface dwellers and the tunnel goers is what initially happens, and then towards the middle and then towards the end, good William B decides to go take on evil William B. At the end, he meets him in his kitchen, and they do battle in evil William B's kitchen. So it's another interesting thing, but that's that version of the story.
And now, the ballad of the question. What keeps mankind alive? What keeps mankind alive? The fact that millions are daily tortured, starved, silenced, and oppressed. Mankind is kept alive by bestial acts.
This first robot was quite ungainly, and its functions were limited. But refinements came in rapid succession, and soon the R-20 was capable of all the thought processes and functions of a man.
This is Harry J. Anslinger, Commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics.
Oh, sorry.
Here I are. It's William B. Here I are. It's William B. Here I are to save the human race. Here I are. It's William B. Here I are. It's William B. Here I are to save the human race. might steal your lunch. Oh yeah, he might steal your watch. He might steal your car. He might bring it back. Whoa, whoa. He might steal away. La 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 la. He might save the day. Whoa, whoa. Save the human race. Here I am, it's William Lee. Here I am, it's William Lee. Here I am to save the human race. Must be destroyed. Seize his assets and his mug. I fight to make the war. Here I are. It's William B. Here I are. It's William B. To save the human.
Dead, man.
So what are some of the techniques that the corporate media uses to align people to these ways of thinking, to change their basic ways of thinking, and get them as a group to support the duopoly? Well, one of the interesting things is semantics, labels, open vessel words. I noticed on the Mark Levin show that what he does is when he wants to give somebody a label, he wants to stick this name tag on them, he'll like repeat it 5 or 6 times, maybe more. He might just go, and this guy's a hemorrhoid. He's the hemorrhoid. He is a hemorrhoid. He's a hemorrhoid. Or, you know, different other such labels. You know, they're always trying to pop a label and make things stick. And they like things like, you know, like Benghazi was a really cool one, because I heard Benghazi during the Obama term, and they repeated to death. And I'm sitting there watching all these terrible things happening, and nobody's mentioning any of the things that are truly important. But you just keep hearing Benghazi. You keep hearing about emails. It's like, you know, you don't need an artificial narrative, but then you say, well, why are they avoiding the things that are really the problems? Because the duopoly wants those particular issues. They don't want to talk about the wars. They don't want to really get caught up in the insanity of the wars. They don't want to get caught up in the concept of how this insane military expansion, where America's in almost every country of the world except for a handful, is expensive beyond belief, and that these wars are expensive beyond belief, and they're frequently completely useless and negative, and they make things worse. But we'll talk about little sideshow things, and we'll keep the wars going. We'll keep the codes continuing. We'll just we'll disregard the Bill of Rights. We'll never really talk about the Patriot Act. We'll just keep renewing the Patriot Act. We'll never talk about what's in the NDAA. We'll just keep renewing it, and everybody will renew it. These two parties that are really so dissimilar, but they use labels. Like, one of the things is open button words. They might say, like you can say duty and honor, and these will inspire people to feel great emotions because they've filled up duty and honor with their own meaning of it and what it means to them and why it's important, why it's special. And yet, if we say, well, what does duty and honor mean? Well, it probably matters a great deal who it is that's saying it. Are we talking about Chinese communist concept of duty and honor? Or are we talking about street gangs view of it? Are we talking about what ISIS refers to when they're talking about duty and honor? Are we on and on and on? I can tell you, you can take whatever group, and they're not going to see things the same way. And the majority of these open vessel words and button words and different things exist that way. The history of mankind is filled with wars over these words. Take the concept of the Almighty, the Creator. So you can get everyone to say, well, this is very important and this is one of the most profound things there are. Yet when you try to fill it in, well, what's going on there? We go back in time, and the War of the Roses, they were battling over Catholicism and Protestantism, and ultimately under Henry VIII he adds the Church of England because he starts supporting Catholicism, but then for political reasons, when he wishes to marry a woman and make her the queen that he's going to later on kill, he creates the Church of England. And so thus continues the constant burning of people, hanging, head chopping, drawn and quartered, put on the rack, all of this over which version of what the Almighty is. And after Henry goes, his bastard son comes in, and now it's Protestantism, and then Bloody Mary comes in, and now we need to burn, garret, slash, hack, drown the Protestants because she's for the Catholic version. And then Elizabeth comes in, and it's another flip. So people are just constantly, they're killing each other over this thing that seems to be a consensus word. And it happens right up to modern times with Northern Ireland. And so, yeah, you can use this word, but there's not a consensus behind it. And it's not just, I just chose that, England, for instance, but it's not there. It's all over the world. The Shiite and Sunni conflict, all over the world, people have been fighting and dying over this concept, and in all different countries. The Catholic Protestant rift was very much alive in Germany too, and so the basis of these movements of people where they're trying to control people with the corporate media, they use these words and some of the old favorites and everything, and what they use these words to create a construction of how the world operates. And of course, conveniently, it funnels people where the owners of such said media would like to send them, the Rupert Murdochs and so forth. And so this is one of the natural things that occur. And this is why you get such polarizing visions of everything, and why people just say, well, just they're completely wrong. The other side is completely wrong, and we're completely right. And there's no gray area. Well, this is just not untrue. Even in stuff that's obvious, there are gray areas. Even if somebody has a policy and it's utterly wrong, frequently it's true. It was a wrong policy, but there's some gray area, and it did have some benefits. Semantics are one of the main tricks, and so to lesser or greater degrees, the corporate media produces things to funnel people and herd them, and things that are not altogether accurate with the way the real world works.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute.
Tonight, Jesus of Nazareth passes by. There may never be another night like tonight. Tonight may be the last time that Jesus will ever pass your way again.
Oh, if we could only come to the place of all-out commitment, we could turn the world upside down and start a counter-revolution. A spiritual revolution with love instead of hate and prejudice, following the Christian flag until Christ is known around the world.
Now, the communist teaches that the individual is not important. The communist teaches that man as an individual is not important at all, that even private property is not important, that all of it belongs to the state, that we should live for the state. Jesus taught the opposite. He taught the value of private property.
In your travels across the country, have you noticed a lot of resentment to the Supreme Court decision banning prayer and Bible reading in the schools?
Oh, yes. I think there's a tremendous resentment, and I think that if a vote were taken in the United States, it would go 80%. It would be overwhelming to have prayer and Bible reading in the schools. I think with certain safeguards, because all groups must be protected. But I think that our way of life was built on the Judeo-Christian concept. And I think that this is a nation under God.
Is moral responsibility out of style? I say it is time to put conscience back in government.
Why do we see wave after wave of crime in our streets and in our homes? Why do we see riot and disorder in our cities, a breakdown of the morals of our young people? My fellow Americans, is this the time for our federal government to ban Almighty God from our schoolrooms?
And we've taken God out of our schools and put all of this in. The Bible says, whatsoever we sow, we're going to reap. And so we are reaping what we've been sowing. I think America is in for the judgment of God unless we turn around and change our way of living.
So we pray, O God, as we enter a new era, that we as a nation may experience a moral and spiritual restoration. O God, we consecrate Richard Milhouse Nixon.
That violent few are not the majority of young Americans, and they are not going to be the leaders of the future. It's time for the great silent majority to stand up and be counted.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. Billy Graham, when he invited me to come here, said that this was to be youth night. He told me that there would be youth from the university, from other parts of the state,
representing different points of view. I'm just glad that there seems to be a rather solid majority on one side rather than the other side tonight.
You know your daddy, he had to die.
We've lost a great deal of confidence in some of our institutions. There's been a moral permissiveness that has frightened millions of people. Some deeper national yearning in the country, a turning towards spirituality, a yearning for morality. And now in the realm of politics, it has come into discussion. Americans want more than anything else this year in their president the spiritual quality.
The most important thing in my life is Jesus Christ. And I formed a very close, intimate, personal relationship with God through Christ that has given me a great deal of peace, equanimity, the ability to accept difficulties without unnecessarily being disturbed.
As much as any American, Jimmy Carter made it respectable to be born again.
There does seem to be a yearning for some kind of spiritual revival in this country. And planned or not, it could turn out that Jimmy Carter's religion will be a net plus.
I believe that I can be a better president if I am elected because of my faith. We have room for about 20 or 30 more folks if y'all want to come on in and worship, brother.
Newsweek, June the 7th, said about that candidate, his allusions to his personal relationship with Jesus Christ are considered bad form. Brother, if there's anything we need, whether it's bad form or good politics, is a man who is more proud of his faith in Christ than any political aspirations he might have. And it would certainly be improper for me to call that man's name, but his initials are the same as our Lord.
Abortion is not a Roman Catholic issue. It is a moral issue. It is a theological issue. It is a human rights issue, an issue that concerns the human rights of unborn babies who, by the hundreds of thousands, are being murdered.
Looking at the Democratic platform and the things that Jimmy Carter supports, I'm not sure that Jesus Christ, I know that Christ will not support that platform.
Moral Majority is not a religious organization. If it were, we could not get 72,000 pastors, which includes Jews, Protestants, Catholics, Mormons, fundamentalists, etc., together without a blood battle. The fact is that it's political. It's a very political organization, and one's membership is based upon citizenship in this country and a commitment to a pro-life, pro-traditional family, pro-moral, and pro-American position.
The Supreme Court has drawn a line, the right of a woman to have control over her own body. I support the ruling and will enforce it to the best of my ability.
I react. I react to the burning of the American flag. I react to the assassination attempts on the Constitution of the United States. I react to irresponsible voting in Congress, to the blatant compromise with communism, to prayer removed from our schools. Brother, I'm ready to do something about it. Amen and amen.
We can, and so help us God, we will make America great again.
I happen to believe, from all the study that I have been able to do, all the information I've been able to get, that when you interrupt a pregnancy, you are taking a human life. Now, that puts that human life within the protection of the Constitution, the guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I'm sick and tired of hearing about all of the radicals and the perverts and the liberals and the leftists and the communists coming out of the closets It's time for God's people to come out of the closets, out of the churches, and change America.
I was asked once what book I would choose if I were shipwrecked on an island and could have only one book for the rest of my life. I replied that I knew of only one book that could be read and reread and continue to be a challenge: the Bible. All the complex and horrendous questions confronting us at home and worldwide have their answer in that single book.
As in no election past, the evangelical right wing is up in arms, out in force this year.
175,000 worshipers sang, prayed, and marched around the Capitol Mall. They said their purpose was to call the national leadership back to God.
We have a threefold primary responsibility. Number one, get people saved. Number two, get them baptized. Number three, get them registered to vote.
In behalf of more than 30 million evangelical Christians in America, we welcome you to this one of the greatest assemblies in the 20th century, Governor Ronald Reagan.
I want you to know that I endorse you and what you are doing. Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm just a flag-waving American, folks. A citizen I'm really proud to be. Oh, I'm just a flag-waving American.
We have a threefold primary responsibility. Number one, get people saved. Number two, get them baptized. Number three, get them registered to vote.
Who believes this land is the best beneath the sky?
Paul, how important is it for Christians to register to vote?
Bill, outside of attaining eternal salvation, I can't think of anything that's more important right now.
And Yankee Doodle, I'm thrilled to see you flying high. Oh, I'm just a flag-waving American. Who believes this land is the best beneath the sky?
The very survival of America is at stake. The secular humanists have been controlling things in Washington for a long time, and I think if Christians will get out there and register and vote, they still have the opportunity to turn it around, but soon it'll be too late.
Oh, I'm just a flag-waving American who believes this land is the best beneath the sky.
Lou Harris is one of the nation's leading pollsters, and I might add he is a Jewish individual. Lou Harris says this: Reagan is also winning the votes of that 26% of the white electorate who are followers of the evangelical preachers who have been active in the election. This group is providing Reagan with his clear margin in the election.
I now recognize the Reverend Jerry Falwell for the benediction. Would you all please rise?
It is a great honor to ask our Lord's blessing upon a man that many of us believe indeed to be our greatest president since Lincoln. Let us pray.
We ask that you would continue to direct him, to strengthen him, and to encourage him even during these important days.
You're seeing the President-elect of the United States and his family, Ronald and Nancy Reagan, the Reagan children and grandchildren.
The fact is, as of this morning, we have a president-elect who is committed to help us pass a human life amendment through the Congress and the state legislatures. We have a president-elect who has said that we will help you return voluntary prayer to public schools. We have a president-elect who has said, I will work hard to return America to that position of number one in the world in military might for the cause of freedom and peace. And this, which no one gave us any hope for, but now as of this morning we have a Senate and a House of Representatives committed to all those same positions to help us do it. A majority.
As you go about forming your new government and selecting the people who are going to head the cabinet, be in your cabinet, and run the government, how much consideration are you going to give to the advice of these new conservative organizations and the moral majority and people like the Reverend Jerry Falwell?
I am going to be open to these people. You are president of all the people, and I am going to want to seek advice where I think that I can can get advice from those who are familiar with a particular problem. I'm not going to separate myself from the people who elected us and sent us there.
From Washington, D.C., the Old Time Gospel Hour presents this special program with Jerry Falwell and President Ronald Reagan. Now, here is Jerry Falwell.
This is the day Christians have longed and prayed for a very, very long time. Today, our president is proposing a voluntary prayer amendment to the Constitution, which would once again allow the children of America to pray in the schoolroom.
In the U.S. Senate tonight, the vote is in on a constitutional amendment that would allow prayer said out loud in public schools. President Reagan was pushing hard for this amendment, but it was defeated, falling well short of the two-thirds vote needed for passage.
Mr. Lincoln said we may very well self-destruct. You don't have to look too long to see the possibility of it today. After all, if we can just keep getting more of our men to have sex with more men, we won't have to worry about babies being born. And if we can just get more women to get out there in the marketplace and start acting like men, and if we can just get other women to look at motherhood as though it is some dread terminal illness, if we can just get society so drunk and so drugged, if ever anybody does get pregnant, then we can abort the baby. That's where we are.
The inspiration for the Rally for Life was President Ronald Reagan's nomination of Arizona Judge Sandra O'Connor to the Supreme Court. The religious right is attacking her legislative record as pro-abortion.
Right to life people oppose her, sir, and we just wonder if...
All of those questions the Attorney General is prepared to answer.
But Mr. President, you have such a firm position on that. Can you give us your feelings about her position?
I am completely satisfied.
On her right to life position?
Yes.
The timing of the appointment of Judge O'Connor was rushed up by a day or two in order to head off right-wing opposition to her. The president's advisors have been focusing on her for more than a month. But after a news report last week made that public, Right to Life and other far-right conservative groups began to attack her pro-abortion voting record in the Arizona State Senate.
In your conversations with the president, did he specifically ask you not to take a stand on the O'Connor nomination until after the Senate hearings?
As I recall the conversation, he gave me all the information he did have on Judge O'Connor. Well, at that time, it was very limited. I gave to him what had come to me, also very limited. And and in the process of the conversation, I don't know if he asked me or if I said, well, the only commitment I can make is, and it's a fair one, I will wait till all the facts are in and the hearings are concluded before then reaching a conclusion. And
you take away our religion and you take away our morality, then what you will wind up with is a government of tyranny. And ladies and gentlemen, as I'm dreaming once again of a nation under God where the Bible is honored and where little children can once again pray in the schools of our nation. I am declaring that I am an official candidate for the Republican nomination for the presidency of the United States.
Bush, 44. Dole, 65. Robertson, 53.
Right.
Probably the most stunning story of the evening, however, so far is that strong second place showing on the Republican side of Pat Robertson.
Mr. Robertson, congratulations.
Thank you, Tom. I'm overjoyed at this expression of love and support from the people here in Iowa.
You were a television evangelist. You often said that you had God's advice on specific decisions that you had to make. Do you get his advice as well on specific political decisions? How does that work?
I'd like to point out to you, if you don't mind, I think it's the last time that I want to be called a television evangelist. I've been a TV broadcaster. I run the 5th largest cable network in America, and I'm on 37 million households with cable, which rivals a lot of the so-called big boys. And because I am a religious broadcaster and have talked to people on major issues, that's why they have given me this tremendous victory in Iowa. And I really believe that henceforth the religious bigotry that question of yours implies is going to be a dead issue. I don't like it.
There was no religious bigotry expressed at all there. You're a religious... I'll accept your language. You're a religious broadcaster. I'll accept that.
This is my first political campaign. I never ran for anything in my life. So far, with only one exception, New Hampshire, I have scored either number 1 or number 2 in every single contest I've been in.
persuade evangelical leaders to vote for Bush?
Well, because there are a lot of people who are interested in having the most qualified man for president.
But they like their religion in South Carolina.
Sure, and they appreciate the fact that the vice president is a man who has all his life been a good Christian.
The Praise the Lord ministry rocked by scandal and the resignation of Jim and Tammy Faye Baker.
How much money were you paid in salary, in bonuses? No idea? You're shrugging, Mr. Baker. You don't know?
As for Jessica Hahn, the woman Jim Baker had sex with in 1980, she has reportedly been getting an average of $1,000 a month from a trust fund set up for her by someone at PTL.
I admitted that I've had 15 to 20 minute relationship with Jessica Hahn.
Gary Smith told how that Reverend Baker, in the nude, at PTL, seduced him.
Jerry Falwell's annual budget is $100 million. Jimmy Swaggart's $140 million. Jim Baker's was $100 million. Pat Robertson's $190 million.
Any plans to become involved with PTL and the sale of Heritage USA?
No, I have nothing to do with that. National credibility for the cause of Christ, in my opinion, is at an all-time low.
Do you really think this thing is accidental that it came out 2 weeks before this election? Of course not. You didn't just come into reporting yesterday, did you?
Are you suggesting that Vice President George Bush engineered the Swaggart revelations?
I haven't said any such thing. You're the reporter. Go out and find yourself. One of the reporters came to me and asked me the question. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying 2 weeks before a crucial election, surely you've been in the business long enough, knowing the quality of the people surrounding George Bush. There is nothing that I would not believe that they would do Swayze.
200,000 voters, the most ever, turned out in South Carolina. George Bush got nearly as many votes as all the other candidates combined.
Excited, go tell everybody that Jesus Christ is King. Jesus Christ is still the King of Kings.
We're an amateur team, and we're all former college athletes that have graduated from across the country. And we're joined together now for a common cause besides basketball, and that is to share with others the person of Jesus Christ.
Religion is business, and in America, it is big business. Very big business.
Millions of Americans seek guidance every day in prayer to the Almighty God. I am one of them. This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil, but good will prevail. This crusade will rid the world of the evildoers. We've never seen this kind of evil before. But the evildoers have never seen the American people in action before either, and they're about to find out. Thank you all very much.
We're going to protect Christianity.
I believe he's president of the United States for a reason. I think God put him there.
Our Christian heritage will be cherished, protected.
He promised to appoint strong conservatives to the federal courts at every level, and President Trump came through.
The president is preparing to reveal his decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
The announcement fulfills a campaign promise for President Trump and is popular among evangelical Christians.
Well, he did. And, you know, I guess the headline from the evening would be evangelicals remain enthusiastically supportive of President Trump. And Shannon, I know a lot of people are still perplexed. Why are Christians so supportive of Donald Trump? Well, it's really not that hard to figure out when you realize he is the most pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-conservative judiciary in history, and that includes either Bush or Ronald Reagan. I think that's why evangelicals remain committed to this president, and they're not going to turn away from him soon.
In just a few moments, I will be signing an executive order to follow through on that pledge and to prevent the Johnson Amendment from interfering with your First Amendment rights. And you're the people I want to listen to. This executive order directs the IRS not to unfairly target churches and religious organizations for political speech. No one should be censoring sermons or targeting pastors. In America, we do not fear people speaking freely from the pulpit. We embrace it. We are giving our churches their voices back. We are giving them back in the highest form. With this executive order, we also make clear that the federal government will never, ever penalize any person for their protected religious beliefs.
But if the Lord were to say something to me and the other presidents that what little I've had to do with them, I don't know. I don't know whether I could have ever gotten anybody to listen to me or not. But I am totally convinced that if the Lord were to say something to me, if the Lord were to say something to David, or if the Lord were to say something to Bishop that the president needs to hear, I have no doubt that we could do it and do it quickly.
Yes, sir.
And have audience to say, thus saith the Lord, and he wouldn't just turn it over to an aide or something and just write it off. He would listen, and it would mean something to him.
Israeli newspaper, Alabama's anti-abortion law. This is what Christian rule looks like in America. Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. We Christians are standing up, and we are going to impose Christian rule in this country.
I'd like to say there is no Bible Belt in America. There's a Bible cloak in America that covers the whole blooming republic. We have a threefold primary responsibility. Number one, get people saved. Number two, get them baptized. Number three, get them registered to vote.
God put us here for some reason. Everything that we do here is aimed at the next world, or it ought not to be done.
Then, my friends, we will truly see a moral majority in America. May God bless you.
The decade of the evangelical.
You love to play all day. You're cutting out the song, tearing out the words that offend you. I wish you'd go away and take away your rules. The time has come for the end of you. You are coming on too strong. The fools you string along, they get down on their knees and they bow to you. I wish you'd go away and take away your rules. The time has come for the end of you. We lick your boot while your halo floats away. Then kiss your ass, we won't sign with MCA. No one really cares about a single thing you say. You're nothing but a bunch of dicks or losers. You protect us from ourselves, we must not be that smart. If we look to you for guidance, time to light the fireplace. We need a cozy flame, a place to put the book of virtues in.
The more you begin to investigate what we think we understand, where we came from, what we think we're doing, the more you begin to see we've been lied to. You've been lied to by every institution. What makes you think for 1 minute that the religious institution is the only one that's never been touched? The religious institutions in this world are put there by the same people who gave you your government, your corrupt education, who set up your international banking cartels. I don't know what God is, but I know what he isn't. And unless and until you are prepared to look at the whole truth, wherever it may go, whoever it may lead to, you have to know the truth and seek the truth, and the truth will set you free.